With a background in construction and a dynamic career in politics, today's guest has brought a raw and unapologetic style to the polished halls of Brussels. Fiercely independent and famously outspoken, he uses his platform to question military alliances, challenge Western foreign policy, and expose the double standards that dominate global politics. He's not your typical politician. This is SOB, and I'm your host, Hassan Tabakoli. A former member of the European Parliament, Mick Wallace has a reputation for confronting EU officials on arms deals, calling out human rights abuses, or defying mainstream narratives on war and diplomacy. Through this, Wallace tries to reshape what it means to be a representative in a time of crisis and complexity. His mission? To speak the uncomfortable truths others are too afraid to say, all in the face of political pressure. Mick Wallace, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to begin by asking about your childhood years. How was it like growing up in Ireland during the 1950s and 60s?
What was it like? Well, listen, I mean, in the 50s, I was born in 55, so I don't remember much of the 50s. The 60s was probably a time of, in Europe, it was a sort of a time of flux. We had, I would have been 12 in 13, and I was 13 in 1968.
Just before the Troubles started.
Yeah, well, you had, I can remember even before the Troubles, I remember the protests in Paris, the student protests, which were big at the time, and I came from, none of my family were involved in politics, but my father was very political. I was one of 12 children. A bit of a madhouse, and we argued a lot. So we were arguing about politics from a very early age. So what was going on in Paris at the time was of big interest to us. And then obviously what happened in Belfast and Derry. So that was big. And I suppose, did it politicize me that much? A bit. But I was very politicized by home anyway, because my father was very interested in politics and he was very vocal as well. So it was an interesting time because it was a time of change. The world was changing quickly. Now, in Ireland was had been behind the rest of Europe because we were an island, a conservative, nationalist Catholic country that was still trying to break free from British Empire. We had got our independence around 1921, but we never really got our independence from them. The British controlled a lot of industry and a lot of business in Ireland. But then the Americans came and they replaced them as the main player. So we kind of swapped one empire for another. But it's not to say that we weren't independent. We weren't independent commercially, but we were in mind in many ways. And today, even less independent commercially. We're very much linked up with the Americans in terms of work and business and influence, which isn't necessarily very positive all the time. But anyways, that's my my ladybird version of it.
Yeah. What inspired you to shift your work from construction to politics?
Well, I was always very interested in politics, and even when I was in construction, I was, I used to use construction sites, put up big banners. I used to paint slogans on the hoarding. I wasn't your average builder. And I don't know if people know the difference between a developer and a builder, but a builder builds buildings. A developer goes out and buys land, designs the building, gets an engineer to structurally design it, and then you get your planning permission and you go and build it. So that's building and that's developing and building. So I would have done both. I got involved in developing around 1997. I started to buy a bit of land. I mean, I started with nothing, but managed to grow gradually. But in 2002, we had a referendum on the Nice Treaty, which was huge in Ireland. Right? It was. We had said no to the Nice Treaty. Not every country votes on the treaty changes in the European Union, but our constitution insists that we have to vote each time there's a major change to the constitution of the European Union which we joined in 1973. So Ireland had a vote on the Nice Treaty and we voted no, which was pandemonium for Europe because everybody had to vote for it or it didn't pass. And we had very good reasons for not voting for it. But I won't go into that now unless you want me to. But I put up a huge banner in the center of the city, 7 meters by 5. And because during an election, you're allowed to put up banners, right? That would normally be illegal. And I put up this huge banner, no to war, no to Nice, no to American terrorism. That was in 2002, 23 years ago. I mean, I wasn't actually, I didn't go into the parliament until 2011, so it was almost 10 years before that. I had a big banner up in 1999 when NATO were trying to bomb Yugoslavia back to the Stone Age. And I had one in 2005 when the Israelis went wild, killing innocent people in Gaza. So, but I put up different banners at different periods. So, but I was always very interested in politics. I suppose my real political education began with South America. When I was 17, I left home, went to America to look for work. And, but I actually, what I wanted to do was to go to South America. So I worked for a while, made a few bob. And I went down, I had a car, myself and a friend, and we drove it as far as Panama. We were kind of running out of money and ran out of road. The road stops in Panama, it doesn't go to Colombia. So we had to sell the car, and I flew to Colombia, Cartagena in northern Colombia. And then I had $40 to live on for the next 5 months. And great experience. And but I was very interested in politics before this. I was 17 at this stage, 1973, but I was in South America when the Americans killed Allende. I was in Bolivia when the American Rangers based in Panama came down and broke up the miners' strikes in Copacabamba in southern Bolivia. I was in Bolivia at the time. They came down and just shot all the leaders, 160 of them. Western press never even reported on it. So I was there 5 years after Che Guevara had been killed in Bolivia. So I can tell you, after witnessing firsthand what US empire was doing in Latin America, I eventually got back to Ireland the following year, and I was very politicized before I got home. And I was a different person than the person who left Ireland in the first place. So that was very much, that had a lot to do with my political formation.
What made you to shift from national politics in Ireland to European politics, the European Parliament?
Well, I had served 2 terms in Ireland, and I suppose I wanted to go to a bigger stage, and I was pretty confident I'd get elected. I wasn't your normal politician. When I first got elected in 2011, I didn't declare I was running until 16 days before the election. And I topped the poll, even though I hadn't been involved officially in politics. But I was very well known through football. I've been a football coach all my life. I've coached football for 37 years in a row. I started a football club in Ireland at senior level called the Wexford Youths, which are still going. Used to go to a lot of football, but I was involved obviously in construction, and I was known by the people through football and construction. And I was seen to be different, and I got elected. So got elected again in 2016, and then when the European elections came up in 2019, I decided I'd try it, and did well, got in.
And so how do you compare your experience in Brussels and Strasbourg to that of Ireland?
Well, it was a bigger platform, and I suppose the national parliaments are more real parliaments in some sense. The European Parliament is a bit of a sham in the sense that you have no real power. See, the European Parliament is made up of three institutions. You have the Council, which is made up of the ministers from the various 27 member states. And they meet every so often. So, for example, if there was a Council Foreign Affairs meeting, the 27 foreign ministers of the countries would come and meet, and they would talk for 2 or 3 days. That would be the Council meeting. And a lot of the Council meetings are held in secret. So it's not very democratic. So the Council itself is not actually elected. They are appointed by the governments in the different member states. Then you have the Commission. Now, they're not elected either. They're appointed by the various groups in the Parliament. But it's a done deal. It's fixed behind closed doors. So very undemocratic, the manner in which it's organised. And the big parties, the big right-wing parties, would decide who was going to get the big jobs. And then you have the third entity is the Parliament itself. There's over 700 members. There were 705 there when I was there for the 5 years. And they are directly elected, but we have very little power. We're not allowed to initiate legislation. Legislation can only be initiated by the Commission. So the Commission is the most powerful of the three, generally speaking. Now, on matters of foreign affairs, the Council used to be the most powerful, but that's gradually changing, and people like von der Leyen have been hijacking some of the power that wasn't normally the remit of the Commission, but she has been trying to make it so, because she has been trying to centralize European power more. She's been trying to change the nature of the institutions, and she wants a Europe of United States of Europe, a bit like America. Whereas when we all joined the European Union, we were promised that we would retain a lot of autonomy, but that's gradually been eroded. But you asked me the difference between the Irish Parliament. Well, in the Irish Parliament, we were allowed to initiate legislation, right? Now listen, the democratic process leaves a lot to be desired anyway. Because of the manner in which the election process works. We always say that in the West, we have the best democracy that money can buy, because money plays a huge part in deciding who gets elected. If you're in power, it's easier to stay there. If you have the backing of big business and money, it's easier to get elected. If you can control the media and pay for some influence in the media, it's easier to get elected. And then if you have the media criticizing your opponents, then that makes it a bit easier as well. So we don't really have democracy. See, democracy is a misused term, and democracy is a situation where the people have a say in how their country is run, how their society is run, how their community is run. Now, you can only have that if you have real local politics, local government. And we don't have local government much in Europe anymore because it's more centralised. In Ireland, local government doesn't exist. We have local administration, but not local government. We elect local councillors to the local government, to the local authority, but they have no power. So we don't really have any local government, so we've no democracy really. And having a vote every 4 or 5 years for the national parliament, that's not really democracy. Yeah. That's just a vote every 4 or 5 years. But in the European Parliament, despite the fact that we had very little power, myself and Claire Daly, for example, we were able to use the platform very well because it's a big platform and the world is watching, and we used it well. In the 5 years, we were the 2 highest speakers in the Parliament. No one spoke as often as we did.
And indeed, I mean, you two, especially you two, were very outspoken in your views and anti-establishment views. How did you get along with other MEPs and collaborate with them on other issues?
We didn't collaborate much on other issues with other MEPs, but to be honest with you, we actually got on with MEPs in every group, despite their politics. And I actually found some of the people that were most difficult to get on with were some of the people in our own group. We were in a group called the Left Group, but it wasn't really left. It was more liberal than left, and the word liberal as well is a very misused term, and they've become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And the Liberals represent a huge track of the hypocrisy in the European Union today. They say one thing, do another. Like, for example, the Greens would be regarded as liberal because they're good on environment, right? But they're terrible on foreign policy. They're terrible on NATO. The Greens, NATO is a war machine. It's destructive. It promotes war. It doesn't promote peace. NATO should be abolished. But the Greens are one of the biggest supporters of NATO in the European Parliament. And you'd wonder, why would people that would care about the environment promote war? Because they do promote war, and they supported fueling the war in Ukraine, which has been a total disaster.
And that's a paradox. I mean, war even destroys the climate.
And just for an example, right? I was on the Environment Committee. I was also on Security and Defence, and I was on Foreign Affairs. But on the Environment Committee, the Greens would not talk about military emissions. The Americans alone are creating more emissions from military activity than all the aviation and shipping combined in the world. Now get your head around that.
Yeah, it's a paradox.
Right? Aviation is about 3% of world emissions today. Shipping is about 2.5% of world emissions. Military is over 6%. And most of that is caused by the Americans. The Americans have over 800 military bases worldwide. The Chinese have one outside of the Chinese area, and that's in Djibouti. The Russians have one outside of the former Soviet Union, and that's in Syria. The Americans have over 800 worldwide. They're a war machine as well, and they're a military power, and their might is based on military activity, and they are creating huge problems from an environmental point of view. But the Greens in the European Parliament do not want to talk about it. They just won't go there. So that's just a simple example of the hypocrisy of the Liberals. But in terms of working with others, I mean, there was times where we would have tried to work. We would be on files, right? Like, for example, I remember there was a file on the measurement of military activity in terms of the environment and how they improve things. But they were literally going to get money to actually expand military activity in a so-called green way, rather than reduce military activities, which is what you need to do if you care about the environment. I'm anti-war. I am pro-peace. I don't want anybody fighting. I don't like to see anybody spending money on military hardware. Now listen, I can see that Iran is scared of of Israel, and because of Israel, they're scared of the Americans, and you feel compelled to defend yourself. Okay, and I understand that. But most military activity is geared towards giving yourself the capacity to be able to impose military activity on others. And I disagree completely with that. And right now, we're seeing a massive increase in the militarization of Europe, which is incredibly dangerous because when you buy more and more arms, there's actually more pressure on you to use them and to go to war. I remember about 2 years ago, the military industrial people came into one of our committees at Security and Defence, and they were telling us why every member state must invest more in military hardware. Everyone must buy more of their stuff. This was the military industry. And I said, why should we buy more hardware? I said, it'll only lead to war. And they said, no, we want peace. No, you don't want war. You don't want peace. I said, you want war, I said. If I make raincoats, I said, if it doesn't rain, I said, I won't sell many raincoats. And I says, if you're making military hardware, fighter planes, tanks, guns, I said, if there's no war, you're not going to sell a whole lot of stuff. You need war to make money. So ye promote war. And that's the truth. They promote war so that they can make money. And they don't care who dies in the war. And remember, war is started by people in suits, but they don't fight in them. The working class fight in the wars. The poor people die in wars, not the rich people. The people in the suits organize the war, the poor die in it.
And we're talking to former MEP Mick Wallace here on the programme. Stay tuned, we'll be back after this short break.
When Russia drops bombs on built-up areas in Ukraine, I have no doubt that the people in Ukraine underneath the bombs are terrorized. It's a form of terrorism. When the US NATO bombed Afghanistan for 20 years and killed several 100,000 and displaced millions, they were terrorizing the people. A UN survey showed that US NATO bombardments of civilians in Afghanistan, 45% of the people killed were children. When the US killed over 1 million civilians in Iraq, was that terrorism? When Israel terrorizes the Palestinian people every day, is that terrorism? When France and the UK and others armed the Saudi UAE to commit genocide in Yemen, where the UN said that over 400,000 are dead and 16 million are starving because of a genocide being carried out with the support of the US, the UK, France and several European states, is that terrorism? When he's going to wake up and start living in the real world?
Yeah, so Mick, you've been a staunch supporter of Palestine and have severely criticised Israeli policy. How do you address accusations of bias or anti-Semitism in response to those critiques?
Well, show me one instance where I was anti-Semitic. One. I would say that the present Israeli government is anti-Semitic. They are doing incredible damage to Judaism. Incredible damage. I see Jews all over the world today, especially in America, which is amazing. So many young Jews are turning against Zionism. And people shouldn't confuse Zionism with Judaism. Zionism is a brutal settler colonial project that was started by the Europeans and the Americans. They were going to steal land from the Palestinians in order to make a place for the Jews because they were anti-Semitic. They didn't want the Jews in Europe. They wanted to put them somewhere else. And that's the Balfour Declaration in 1916. He was the British parliamentarian at the time. He came up with the idea of creating a state for Israel. He was an anti-Semite. He didn't want the Jews in Europe. And there was plenty of others there that didn't want the Jews in Europe. They didn't like them. So they wanted to create a state somewhere else for them. And they were going to take it from Palestine because the Palestinians had no power. Oh, we'll rob them. People need to understand that the Balfour Declaration doesn't mention the word Palestinian or Palestine once. Not once does it mention Palestine or Palestinian. How can you write about stealing someone's land and not mention them? That was 1916. Then obviously Israel was given the state in 48. They expelled hundreds of thousands of Palestinians off the land, killed plenty of them, ethnically cleansed an area of it, and they've been ahead ever since. The genocide didn't start on the 8th of October. It started in 1948, and it's been going on ever since. It intensified on the 8th of October. It got more brutal and ugly. And the big difference this time was, while the genocide had been going on since 48 up to the present, we actually didn't really see it for what it was. But now we've watched the genocide on our telephones. And to criticize the Zionist apartheid regime in Tel Aviv, to criticize them has nothing to do with being anti-Semite. Zero. If you cannot criticize somebody carrying out a genocide, then you have no link to humanity. There's over 20,000 children slaughtered. There's over 15,000 women slaughtered. Israel says it's fighting Hamas. That's a lie. Israel is not fighting Hamas. Israel is fighting the Palestinians. It wants to destroy the Palestinians. It wants to ethnically cleanse the land of Palestine for themselves. And they have the Americans and the Europeans to help them because it's a settler colonial project that they started, and it's still their project. There's not one EU member state, not one, has broken business links with Israel. Not one. How can that be? On the 6th of June, Israel will play Estonia in a World Cup football match. How in God's name are they being allowed to play a game of football in the World Cup competition after killing 20,000 children? Is it anti-Semite to say that it's wrong to slaughter innocent children, innocent women and innocent men? Is that anti-Semite? No. To say that's anti-Semite is a misuse of the term. And there's very few people doing as much damage and as the likes of Netanyahu at the moment to Judaism.
You mentioned that Zionism is a settler colonial project. How similar do you think the Zionism project was to the British occupation and invasion of Ireland 800 years ago?
Listen, I mean, we could talk for 10 hours about what went on between England and Ireland, right? England illegally occupied Ireland for about 800 years. But it changed a lot over time. Now, they stole our land with the plantations, right? About 350 years ago. They planted the area. We had 4 big provinces in Ireland. Munster, Leinster, Ulster and Connaught. And the good land was in Munster, Leinster and Ulster. So they said to the Irish, you can go to hell or go to Connaught. They expelled the people from the area where the land was good. So the land was stolen from them. It's the same as the land has been stolen from the Palestinians. And what happened then was they planted Munster, Leinster and Ulster with people from England and Scotland. The people that went to Munster and Leinster were mostly from England, and they became what was known as absentee landlords. These guys inherited huge tracts of land, but they didn't live there. They paid someone to run the land for them. But in Ulster it was different. And that's one of the reasons that Ulster is still occupied by the Brits.
Current Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland,
yes.
Yeah. Ulster is Northern. Ulster had 9 counties, 6 of them are Northern Ireland today,
yeah.
right?
Mick, fast forward 800 years up until today, okay?
Right.
Do you ever see, could you ever see a united Ireland in the near future?
Yes. Yeah, it's become...
How feasible is it?
It would be difficult, and Northern Ireland would actually cost the Southern Ireland a lot of money to take Northern Ireland on board at the moment. There's a lot of problems in Northern Ireland. It hasn't developed in a natural way because it wasn't really a natural entity, and the Brits haven't been good in it, right? Now, they've subsidised it in some ways, but not in a healthy way. But I suppose the big obstacle to unity up to now is that for a long time, since 1921, there was more Protestants than Catholics in Northern Ireland. There was more Unionists than Nationalists. But that's changed now. And the Catholic families are bigger than the Protestant families. So the demographic is changing. And that's a big factor.
That's based on the recent census.
Yeah. So we're not going to have a united Ireland in the next 10 years. But if you ask me, do I think united Ireland will be united within 20 years? I think probably, yeah.
And you're watching SOB. Stay tuned, there's plenty more to come.
If you could come
Mr.
here,
Mick Wallace, please join us here on this stage. We really appreciate your eloquent speeches in the European Parliament. ایشون به خطابه‌های خیلی فصیح و قرار خودشون در
He's a
صحنه
very
پارلمان بسیار
eloquent
شهرت دارن.
speaker in
شاهد
the
یکی
European
از ما در
Parliament.
این برنامه هم باشیم. Mr. Wallace, if you want to share a few words with our audience.
جناب والیس اگر میخواین که کلامی رو اینجا مطرح بکنیم با حضار.
We don't really deserve this.
اه،
We don't do near enough.
ما در واقع استحقاق این جایزه رو
Claire
نداریم. کارمند
pointed out
کافی انجام ندیم. کلر خودش دقیقاً گفت
That
که
we worked in the European
ما
Parliament
در پارلمان اروپا
that is really a
کار
parliament of
می‌کنیم که
hypocrisy.
یه پارلمان در واقع نفاق و
They
دروییه.
say they have European
اونها
values,
میگن که ارزش‌های اروپایی
but
رو
they have
دنبال
proved that they
می‌کنن.
don't.
اما
They
ثابت
have
کردن
interests.
که ندارن
And sadly,
و
they're very much
متاسفانه
tied to the interests of US empire.
فقط در واقع منافع
They're tied to the interests of Western
امپراتوری
imperialism.
آمریکا و امپریالیسم
things
آمریکایی رو
would
بهش
change.
وابسته هستن. اما تغییر خواهد کرد.
When they allowed Yemen to be bombed back to the
وقتی
Stone
که
Age,
در
starting
واقع
in March
میرن در واقع
2015, even with
یمن
the
رو
complicity of
بمباران
the UN,
میکنن و متاسفانه
we didn't see
سازمان
any
ملل
of
هم تو این
it.
زمینه
There was a
سکوت کرد
blackout.
و هیچ همه
But
جا
we've just
در
watched
واقع
the genocide on our
تاریک
telephones
بود
from
و
Gaza for over 18 months. The world will not be the same again.
دنیا دیگه
There's no going back.
تغییر کرده نمیتونیم
Western imperialism has been exposed for what it is.
غربی
The
کاملا
political
آشکار
class
شده
have been
افشا
exposed
شده
for who they
و
are.
در
The
واقع
mainstream
رهبران
media have
سیاسی
been
هم
exposed for who they
افشا
are.
شدن و همچنین
And the
رسانه‌های
people
غربی هم افشا
are seen
شدن
through it.
واقعیتشون مشخص شده و
Things are
مردم
not going
دیگه
to be
الان
the
می‌بینن
same.
دیگه
Zionism
تغییر
is
پیدا
finished.
کرده
And there's
صهیونیسم
no
به
beating the
پایان رسیده
Palestinians.
و
Thank you.
دیگه نمیشه دیگه فلسطینی‌ها رو مورد
Very good. Nick, usually at the end of our program, we ask our guest to look into the camera opposite them and speak to the audience about an issue that is much concerning to them. There you are, whenever you're ready. About 1 or 2 minutes, yeah.
Okay, listen, my politics would be labelled as, I suppose, of a left-wing nature. So what's the difference between left and right? Well, I suppose right-wing politics prioritises the interest of business, prioritises the interest of the powerful over the majority of the citizens. Left-wing politics puts the interest of the people first. We have a big challenge all across the world. We have huge poverty, we have huge inequality. Capitalism has failed. Neoliberalism, which is capitalism with the gloves off, is incredibly damaging to society. But capitalism itself is incredibly damaging to society. And we have to move away from it. It has proven to be unworkable for the majority of the people. It's good for the few, it's bad for the many. And in Ireland, we have huge inequality. We have poverty, despite being a very rich country. And I see the same thing in Iran. I see huge inequality here. And while you have huge problems with sanctions, you have huge problems with having to keep US empire at bay. And the US empire, Western imperialism has been incredibly damaging to this whole region because they've always just wanted to plunder this place. They want to take your resources, steal the added value of your labor and steal your mineral wealth. They want to make money from you and they don't care about you. But that's Western imperialism. Your own governments, sadly, are also tended to go towards the capitalist route. And we appeal to people all over the world to fight for a fairer society where the interests of all are treated equally and fairly. And while Iran's biggest problem at the moment is sanctions, and you're struggling to make ends meet and to look after your people, I would appeal to ye, just keep in mind that don't go down the capitalist route, the neoliberal route, the way the West has done. And look to China rather than the West. Now, China has used capitalism to build its economy, but it has done it in a way where the state has maintained control over essential services. The state manages the capitalists. The capitalist doesn't manage them. In the West, the capitalists manage the state. They control the state. And I see a lot of that here as well in Iran. You're an amazing country, amazing people. You're 3 times the size of France. You've about 85 million people, amazing potential. I appeal to you to build a fairer society. Remember that capitalism has failed the West. It'll fail you too if you go down that route. So learn more from China than from Western Europe.
Thank you, Mick. And we thank our guest, Mick Wallace from Ireland, for taking part in this programme. And as always, follow us on our social media platforms and do send us your comments and suggestions. From me, Hassan Tavakoli, it's bye for now.